So here is Andrew Tate speaking with Candace Owens. I don't even know how he is out of custody. I guess he must be out on bail for sex trafficking in Romania. So he's a criminal. But this is Candace Owens, who cares deeply about sex trafficking. And that's why she's spoken so much about it in the past and saving the children and such. Here with a known predator, Andrew Tate, speaking about the nature of masculinity.
We should just say alleged, just because the stuff's working through the cases. Even though, like, I've seen enough on his online pages where he's basically saying, I am a pimp. He's talking completely like a pimp. I make these women fall in love with me, and they'll do whatever I want, and he keeps them deprived. Like, that's a pimp. And
alleged, right?
Alleged, but like again, like. I understand why it's alleged. Let's just say that.
Certainly. I mean, we're being quite careful here. All right, so this is them speaking, and I just felt like here's a good example of somebody who really hates themselves and overcompensating a lot to it. I don't know. Candace Owens speaking about women.
And I can just think of COVID, and I use it as an example because it's the most recent large PSYOP they've attempted on us, where the amount of people I saved personally, I must have saved 200 people's lives from that vaccine. Me personally, just because me as a man, they'd come to me and go, I want to travel. And I'd say, listen, I don't even have time to explain to you, but have I ever been wrong? No.
This is straight from the Barbie movie.
Why aren't you in England anymore?
A year later, they're like, I'm so glad I didn't get that. I'm like, I told you. Like, it's amazing, like, what a masculine essence can do. So that's another reason it's under attack, because if they can remove the masculine essence from society, well, now you have a society. Imagine a society where you can control purely with emotional arguments. We're almost there.
We are in a matriarchy, and this is why they accuse me of being an internalized misogynist, because I'm able to think through and acknowledge the flaws of what happens in society when women get power. And if you want to know what happens, look around you. Women fall for emotional arguments the entire time. They show us a commercial, show us. It's so sad. And before they get to the rational aspects of it, they're already invested emotionally. And I think that virtually every societal ill that we are facing today is because of women. And I think the greatest recent example of that is the Bud Light controversy, because, trans people were just playing dress up as women, invaded every women's space. Right, women said,
I wanted to get through that pivot that she makes there, because it's really important to understand how there's really no logical connection, right, between her first comment about how we live in a matriarchy and virtually every societal ill can be traced back to women. That's what she says. And then she immediately jumps to the Bud Light controversy and trans women. And it's like, wait, how did those two thoughts connect? And it's because in a bigot's mind, transphobia and misogyny are indelibly linked. And like, that's, I really think, important for people to understand when we're in this moment of acute transphobia in particular, is the overfocus on trans women or girls in women's sports, right? And the dear protectors on the right. They inherently really believe that why would you ever want to be a woman? If you're born as the more powerful sex, why would you ever want to, how could you ever want to be a woman? Because that is being a part of the ones who are dominated. You are changing your sex at birth, right? You are identifying with the gender that is weaker, that is more pathetic. And so for Candace, as she just completely does her overcompensation word vomit, which is her trademark, makes that logical leap really easily, because for when we're combating like TERFs and stuff, it's just important for people to understand that you can't have transphobia without the underlying, that's not true, but many of the transphobic arguments are the underbedding is misogyny.
I'd like to return to the COVID thing, the largest PSYOP ever that they've done recently, as that fucking moron said. The PSYOP of the COVID era was that this ain't dangerous. We're all overacting. Get your ass back to work and go make your boss some money, which Tate and all these right wingers participated in. But I'm glad that to see the principle being established that their effect had their media and their broadcasting had a public health effect, because I think it did as well. I just think it probably had effect in the opposite direction. Now, I don't know if 200 deaths I'd place at it, but Joe Rogan, all these freaks, Brett Weinstein, all these people who are anti-vax. I'll just read a story. This is from the Journal of the American Medical Association, released recently. After May 1st, 2021, when the vaccines were available to all adults, researchers found that the excess death rate gap between Republican and Democrat voters widened from a percentage point of negative 0.9%, because more Democrats were dying at that point, because bigger cities,
to
7.7 percentage points.
That's a huge swing.
That meant the excess death rate among Republican voters was 43% higher than among Democrat voters. I think these people got people killed by stoking anti-vax anxiety for their views. And I am glad to say that actually this stuff doesn't matter. I'm Joe Rogan. I'm just a comedian, man. None of this stuff matters. I'm Jimmy Dore. I'm just a comedian. No, actually commenting on this stuff does come with some level of responsibility. And you can hyperventilate about Fauci all you want. You motherfuckers got people killed by stoking that anxiety.
They got people free, Matt.
Yeah, free from lungs.
Free from the mortal coil.
Free from life, yeah. Free from the earthly burdens.
I mean, it is messed up because we know, I mean, it was just a year ago, maybe a little more. Like people were, and like Republicans were on their deathbeds, like Republican radio show hosts were like dying, like suffocating in their own fluids, begging for the vaccine because they realized that it would, they hoped it would have saved their lives on their deathbed. And, it was too late and it didn't work. And the people who are still promoting that vaccine propaganda, they just have no shame, or rather anti-vaccine propaganda. But you know what I mean? They have no shame when it comes to like the lives that like were lost. I'm not saying that anyone's like legally responsible, but it always just amazes me how comfortable people feel like sharing things that are actively harmful to their audience, whether it be like crypto scams or anti-vaxxer propaganda, and knowing that it's going to have a negative impact on large swaths of people, and just being like, not my problem. I'm not responsible. I'm not responsible for what my audience does or who's in my audience or any of that stuff. I just say ideas. I'm just an idea person. It just seems like, there's no room for self-reflection at that level. Otherwise, you might just have to acknowledge that people do like look to you for that kind of thing. When you have like 18 MMA fighters on and you talk about jujitsu locks or whatever the hell he's up to this week, people in between that are like thinking, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about when it comes to like the human body. And so they listen to you.
Well, notice how he immediately jumps from like stuff about COVID to concepts of masculinity. Like he links like not being weak enough to get the vaccine. Don't be a sheeple. Use my alternative methods, which like should be good enough for you to fight this virus with your own strength. Use that as opposed to do what like public health experts are asking of you. I mean, to bring up Rogan is apt here because they both sell visions of masculinity that are like anti-authority in ways that could potentially get their audience killed when it comes to a global pandemic, but like that are really isolating, both from like a how can you connect with women point, but also in its like anti-communal elements, which include like public health.
Well, then they also represent parasites, like beyond being I think a fairly blatant sex trafficker. We'll see about what the law says about that. They are also just passive income parasites. It's all just this passive income scam, and that is, and it's Joe Rogan saying, "Hey, I used to believe in UBI, but no one wants to work anymore." These are parasites that earn money passively by owning things. And yeah, go ahead, Brandon.
I was going to say, Hustler Academy is a legitimate business. Obviously, it even has a pre-med course where you can learn about the dangers of vaccines. So we should be careful.
Yep.
Yeah, I got my MD from Hustler Academy.
All right, let's keep going.
Is the Bud Light controversy, because I mean, trans people were just playing dress up as women, invaded every women's space, and women said, "Oh, but I feel bad," because it's how he identifies at the inside, without thinking through the fact that you're quite literally disappearing yourselves, right? You're quite literally saying, I will cease existing before I let this grown man who's wearing a wig have a bad feeling. That's insane. That is a patently insane emotional conclusion to come through.
All right, again, pause it again. Cease existing. This is, again, I just want to keep hammering this for the for the goddamn TERFs out there who pretend to be feminists, this is an example of why transphobia is capitulating to the male gaze, because that's Candace there conflating disappearing oneself with not being a vessel for at least for women, right? For the definition of women expanding into people that are not just there for impregnation or impregnance, for getting pregnant, essentially vessels for male sperm and children. That's what women are reduced to under a trans exclusionary radical feminist vision of the world. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, Candace Owens is just a vocal bigot, but I think she has a lot of like purchase in the minds of like early 2000s, like Ally McBeal feminists, like people whose definition of like gender equality is rooted in that sort of second wave, like men are from Mars, women are from Venus understanding of gender identity and sort of society, but they're still equal. You know, I don't want to say separate, but equal, but more complementary, have complementary skill sets. Like women can raise the homes and should be, you know, birthing babies, and men are like out gathering and stuff like that. They still believe that that's the route to gender equality. It's the acceptance that men and women are compatibly different in some ways, but that doesn't mean that women don't deserve to be, or rather, you know, not to be crass, but doesn't mean that women don't deserve to be mistreated by their husbands. Yep. Women don't deserve to be, and like that's the full definition of their feminism, and it's the kind that you saw mainstream for the most part in the late 90s, early 2000s, and a lot of people just have a hard time getting past that. But you know, obviously Candace Owens goes way past that line, but I think you see a lot of TERFs just like involving themselves in this kind of bigoted thinking because they're afraid, as you pointed out in the past, that feminism is moving past their struggle, the struggle of the suburban white housewife who doesn't want her husband out like cheating on her with their secretary.
I mean, like, and her vision. Yeah, and her vision of feminism, though, by the way, Candace Owens would be in defiance of it, just by like, whatever.
She's like a handmaid, you know, she's like putting people in the handmaid's outfits in her free time. But of course, you know, Andrew Tate is going to agree because he's just a predator, allegedly. And so it's helpful for him to get in everyone else's minds that like, no, the real predators are trans women, not me, who is allegedly trafficking people in Eastern Europe. It's trans women.
Yeah.
Go see The Sound of Freedom.
There's a little bit more. We'll finish and that's that.
That is a patently insane emotional conclusion to come through. Yeah. Then Dylan Mulvaney sipped one beer, and Kid Rock was out there with an AK, and then it was dumb because men said absolutely not. And I give that example because women need to realize how backwards it is that it took men to stand up to say something was wrong when it was so obviously patently wrong.
Thank you, men.
Nobody cared.
Thank you, men. Thank you, men. Thank you, men. Thank you, men, for preserving femininity. Oh, men, you're the ones who define it for us. Thank you, men.
Yeah, this is all the anti-trans stuff. But I do want to pull up this science-based medicine article, Bradley, because some people need a fucking remedial biology education, including Richard Dawkins, who was on Twitter the other day promoting one of his clips saying sex is binary. As a biologist, I know that's actually not true. So science-based medicine, really great website ran by Stephen Novella of The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, who's a neurologist and a clinician, and in addition to being a podcast, he's completely goated. He has this, and I'll just scroll down a little bit. The notion that sex is under biological sex is not binary. The notion that sex is not strictly binary is not even scientifically controversial. This is from like a few years ago, by the way. This is this isn't in response to Dawkins' dumb shit. Among experts, it is a given, an unavoidable conclusion derived from actually understanding the biology of sex. It is more accurate to describe biological sex in humans as bimodal, but not strictly binary. Bimodal means there are essentially two dimensions to the continuum of biological sex. In order for sex to be binary, there are going to be two non-overlapping and unambiguous ends to that continuum, but there clearly isn't. There is every conceivable type of overlap in the middle, hence bimodal but not binary. And like I still see people being like, let's make male female. Like, yeah, those like sex chromosomes, they are like male or female, right? But like how that actually expresses itself in biology is different. So like, I mean, people are morons on this, and it's wild. Like, you didn't see Matt Taibbi mention, say, the science-based medicine review, because this is, I'm pretty sure, in response to Matt Walsh. You didn't see like actually, people are addressing this stuff. It was just the second order meta critique of PMC's liberals being, upset about it.
Yeah. The pink hair vibes is really the thing that they're most focused on. It's such shallow. No matter how many adjectives someone like Greenwald uses in that analysis, it's the most shallow garbage in the world.
Yeah, and I would recommend people read that full thing if you can scroll up to the headline for it. But I mean, this guides you through like the cutting edge of like where this question is. If you wanted the scientific into it, and actually, guess what? The consensus in the scientific community is similar to the growing consensus in the medical community, which is that this is not a made-up thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's something that even when I was in grad school years ago, that was kind of old hat, that we understood that not just gender was a spectrum, but sex was also a spectrum in terms of not just, physical presentation, but also just genetic and like other types of like combinations of sort of gene expressions. And so like it's always interesting when people on the right are clearly working from an emotional and oftentimes like secularized dogmatic view of gender, like, I was taught this in high school one way and that's the way it is, or the Bible says this, but I don't believe in the Bible, so I just say it's natural instead of saying the Bible says this. And it's just another question that has been more or less settled by science, even when the more erudite of the right wingers can pull out one study that the person who wrote it usually doesn't even agree with their conclusion based on the study, and will often come out and say they don't agree with it, that somehow their interpretation of the science and their interpretation of humanity is more accurate to the science, when it's just based on what is essentially like thinking really hard about it and going out and watching too much porn. And that's basically it.
This is it's a really fascinating article. People should read it, but I just want to read a couple more paragraphs. I know we got to go, but here we go. But given what we do know, the answer, the simplest answer is that gender identity is a brain function as much as sexual orientation is. Gender identity awareness is usually established by age 2 to 3, which itself is strong evidence it is biological. For the position that gender identity is all psychocultural should not be treated as the default answer. It is not reasonable. Anyway, here's an interesting thing I didn't know about. We could also approach this question scientifically by looking at the brains of cis versus trans individuals to see if there's any difference.
Yep.
This research is preliminary with mixed findings, but is trending in the direction of showing some differences between cis and trans brains. Overall, studies do find differences in some measured features, with trans brains looking more like the identified gender than the apparent biological sex, even prior to any medical interventions.
I was wondering if the article would get there, because I've heard about these kinds of studies, but as he says, it is preliminary, so I've been like kind of cautious about citing it.
But Steve is a great person to watch as that stuff develops.
Yeah.